Now, what is prophecy? This is a very complicated question, one that I've been spending a long time thinking about, but I'm going to try and distill some ideas about it here. This is in no way comprehensive. Prophetic speech is divine speech. It's speech of the gods. It's the thoughts and the knowledge and the opinions of the gods that is translated for human ears. Humans can't understand the gods in their own words, and they can't interact with the gods directly. So they need these sort of intermediary figures to translate for human ears. And that's where prophets come in. The Sibyls, the Pythia of Delphi, which takes over, and then in mythology, figures like Cassandra and Tiresias. An analog to this would be the passage in Exodus where Moses has gone up to the mountain to talk to God, and God delivers the tablets with the commandments, which Moses then relates to the people. Moses is the only one that is allowed to interact with God directly. The passage of Exodus reads like this. So Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered it. The glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai. For 6 days the cloud covered it, and on the 7th day the Lord called to Moses from inside the cloud. To the Israelites, the glory of the Lord looked like a raging fire on top of the mountain. Moses entered the cloud as he went up the mountain. He stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Moses is this intermediary figure where he interfaces with the God directly. The God delivers some kind of information or insight to Moses, which Moses then brings to the people because the people themselves can't interact with God directly. This mediating role that Moses plays is very similar to the role of the Sibyls. The Sibyls are, in effect, the mouthpieces of the gods. And prophecy can come from pretty much any god, but the gods that are really directly dealing with prophecy are gods like Apollo and, to a lesser extent, Helios. Both sun gods, incidentally, maybe because the sun sheds light on things. An idea that Helios is the all-seeing sun. So they have this kind of superior knowledge. So they're the gods that deal primarily with prophecy. So prophets, like the Sibyls, are priestesses of these prophetic gods, Apollo, and so on. Now, Apollo is not just a god of prophecy, he's also a god of music, and several other things that are unrelated. It's true that bards, like Hesiod and Homer, Hesiod in particular, spend a lot of time talking about their relationship to divine speech, and the songs of the bards are supposed to be inspired in a similar but not exactly the same kind of way as the prophets. So we'll see as we go exactly how the prophet interacts with the god in these moments of direct interaction. The nonfiction accounts that we have of prophecy are usually in reference to a prophet that is attached to a temple. So in our case, the Sibyls, elsewhere the Pythias, and so on. In those accounts, we don't actually see this moment of interaction because it usually goes something like this. A querent seeking an answer to a question will go to one of these temples of prophecy, Delphi, Dodona, and submit a question to the priestess. Typically, there will be even more intermediaries, other priests who work at the temple who will receive the question, deliver it to the priestess. I'm thinking of the Pythia here specifically. And then the priestess does her thing, which is not typically reported, and then the answer comes back and is delivered to the querent, usually by someone else. And as I said, they're typically vague answers, and the querent will usually walk away more confused than ever after, of course, making a donation to the temple. In these kinds of accounts, the interaction between the seer and the god are not described. In poetry and storytelling more broadly speaking, we as the audience are actually invited into the conversation between the prophet, the seer, the oracle, and the divine. And we also get to see what these intermediary figures are like. they're not typical. Because prophecy is this superhuman thing, and because divine speech is so far removed from human speech, the intermediaries who are interacting directly with the god, they have something about them that is not quite right, or some sort of symbolic sacrifice, if you want. Like Tiresias, for example, one of the most famous prophets from ancient fiction, he's famously blind, and Homer is reported to be blind as well. The idea is that Tiresias has given up his human sight in order to receive true sight, real, true understanding of how things work, and access to this special knowledge. There's also an idea that maybe these liminal figures are a little bit mad. Maybe they're a little bit crazy. The way that their interaction with the gods is depicted is sometimes to show them in a frenzied state, almost possessed. We'll see some examples of that, especially as we read more from the Aeneid. But there's this cool passage in Plutarch. Actually, the entire work is pretty cool. I'll link it down below. We'll have to talk more about that at a later date. Essentially, this is a dialogue where friends are discussing some of the specifics of oracles and how they're delivered to people. And at one point, he has this quote about the Sibyl, where he says, "But the Sibyl, with frenzied lips as Heraclitus has it, uttering words mirthless, unembellished, unperfumed, yet reaches to 1,000 years with her voice through the god." So she speaks, at least according to Heraclitus, with frenzied lips. She's in an altered state somehow. And this is how you end up with theories about, like, maybe the Pythia was on drugs, maybe the Pythia was inhaling, hallucinogenic gases. That's not the topic of today's video, so I'm not going to get into that, but this idea that they're somehow not quite right. And like I said, we'll see more of that. There's a lot more to say about prophecy and the nature of prophecy, but suffice it to say that these intermediaries are liminal figures. They're not quite people, although they are people. They're mortal, they're human, and yet somehow they're beyond that. They have this air of mystery around them. They're set apart by the work that they do.